Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream.
Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.
For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Assuredly, I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am back here. It is episode 47 of the Bible Lens podcast. We are live on YouTube, we're live on Rumble, and we are live on X, all three platforms. And I need to say this right now before we get on. Two things just real quick right off the rip. One, this is probably going to be the most eye-opening episode of the Bible Lens podcast that we have done quite literally since the Islam episodes. And that was a while ago. There's going to be a lot that we're going to break down here tonight. And I know that there's a lot of people who are both believers and non-believers who probably have never heard of some of the information that we're going to talk about here tonight. But once I lay it all out for you, this is going to make everything that you guys are seeing about Pride Month, about everything LGBTQ, make so much sense in a light you probably have never seen it before. And the realization may terrify you, but at the same time, the realization is also going to come with another positive realization as well. We'll get to that later on in the show. Secondly, I just wanted to send this out kind of as a little bit of a forewarning. The last couple of nights I've had a little bit of an issue with Infinity. So if you guys were here on Friday night for the movie review show, I had to end it somewhat abruptly because we were having internet issues. I think last night I kind of started off having little issues, but then it went straight through here again. So I'm just going to let you guys know now. In case for any reason I get disconnected here, it's not on my end, it's on Infinity's end. I'll work around getting it situated here, and if I have to, I will re-record this whole thing and post it on a later date, because what we're going to talk about tonight, I think, is very, very important, because when we talk about issues of Pride Month and the LGBTQ, there's so much nuance to this conversation that I don't think people have really any concept of. But man, once we talk about what we're going to talk about here tonight, I think you guys are going to see this in a whole new light, and I'm going to let that be the teaser for tonight's show. Like I said, we're here on all three platforms at the moment. I know more people are going to be trickling on as the show goes on here. Leslie Tarkin is already here joining us, saying hail to all you lovely people. Vanya is also here joining us as well. I know we got some people over on Rumble too. Like I said, a lot of people are going to be trickling in throughout the course of this show. So let me go ahead and... There's so much to get to here. I'm going to try to open this the best way that I possibly can. So Last week, what we did here for the first episode of the Bible Lens in Pride Month is that we talked specifically about the history of Sodom and Gomorrah, kind of like the history of where you saw all of this gross, vile, evil sexual sin and the nation that kind of birthed it, right? And we talked about this from a historical perspective because we didn't really get into the spiritual perspective of this whole thing. What we knew about Sodom and Gomorrah was that there was obviously a lot of gross sexual immorality that was happening in that nation. We talked about homosexuality. We talked about transgenderism, pedophilia, bestiality, rape, violence, murder. So much stuff going on here. And you realize that it was so wicked that there was a reason why God quite literally destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah from the heavens, because of just how wicked and how evil it truly was. And we put it in a frame where it's like a lot of people, let's be very, very clear here. We are the Gnostics or non-believers. Whenever God releases his wrath onto a very wicked group of people, it's always their job to try to shift it as if somehow God is in the wrong and that these people are just innocent victims. And what I wanted to show you last week is that this is not a case of God smiting a group of people who were just completely innocent, who just didn't obey, or quote unquote. The things that were going on here were very, very violent and very, very against everything, a rebellion of God's nature, a rebellion of God's love, every single aspect of it. And that's what we talked about last week. I want to go even deeper into it this week because there's a spiritual element here that is at play that I got to be completely honest with you here. The only way that anything that we're going to talk about in this episode here is going to make sense is that you have to accept the reality that there is in fact a God. You do have to accept the reality that not only is there a God, but the world, and I do mean in a very literal sense, the world is in active rebellion against that God in every step of the way. And when you realize that, then you start seeing the whole LGBTQ movement in a much different lens than you do it before. Because here's what it mostly is. If you remove God out of the picture altogether, right? And this is what happens. You'll see this progression here. If you remove God out of the picture entirely, then you're looking at it as like, oh, well, if two guys want to get married, or if two girls want to get married, or if a guy wants to change his gender to a girl, it's like, who are you to say that this is wrong, right? Who are you to say that anything that they're doing is wrong or against nature? Because I don't believe in God, so I can't use that as the metric here, or I'm just going to remove God out of the equation altogether. So when you remove God out of the equation altogether, you're missing a fundamental big picture about what is the spirits that are leading this movement. And I do mean spirits. And I know this sounds very, very odd, but trust me, it's going to make sense as we go along here. I saw Alex vs. Evil just jumped in here. Diesel just jumped in here as well. So like I said, this is going to be a very, very interesting show. Let's go ahead and get started with this. So what I'm going to show you here tonight is that when it comes to transgenderism, and I know that transgenderism is a small portion of the LGBTQ, but when you see it, it's a perfect example of the overall spirit that is in play here. And it's a spirit that the Bible has been warning you about for centuries, quite literally since the beginning of civilization. This has been going on here. So what is the entire point of the LGBTQ movement in and of itself? The whole point of the movement is, and I say this very, very firmly, it is a active and outright rebellion against God and against God's design. This is what you're seeing here. And here's what you have to remember. This rebellion did not start here on earth. It did not start here. This is a rebellion that started in heaven when Lucifer fell and he rallied a third of heaven's angels to literally go to war against God. That's where the rebellion started. And well, I'll go to some Bible verses here. You probably heard them multiple times before here. But Bible verses that talk about, hey, look, our battle is not against flesh and bone. Our battle is against principalities and powers, which means that there are quite literally spiritual and demonic forces at hand here, and they are the ones leading this rebellion against God. And they're essentially trying to get as many people, as many of God's people, many of God's children to rebel with them as they can before their time is up here. So I want to jump back over to Genesis here just for a second. This will be a quick little refresher for you guys who were here last week. Talked about this, talking about why homosexuality is in fact a rebellion against God, and why it's a direct mockery against God's design. Because I talked about this. We talked about the institution of marriage and what marriage actually represents in the Bible. Talks about this union between a man and a woman. Go even further here, Genesis 1. This is 26 through 28 here, and then God says. And then God said, "Let us make our own. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish in the sea." So, real quick there, I know he's saying, "Let us make him in our image." When he's saying "our," he's referring I should say, he's referring to Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, the Trinity. That's what it means. That's what's being meant there. Some Gnostics try to twist that to say that, oh no, he's talking about the angels. That would make the angels creators of humanity, which is complete heresy. So be very clear about who he's talking about here when he's saying "our." It's talking about Christ and the Holy Spirit along with God the Father. Says here, it said, "Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds in the air, over the cattle, over the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image, so his own image, male. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, and he created them. And then God blessed them, and God said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing that moves on the earth." That was God's original plan. That was God's original design. And quite literally, since the beginning of humanity, Satan has been actively working to pervert that very decree that you see all the way in Genesis number 1. Now, some people will try to argue that, their misunderstanding of scripture, because to be honest, people who use this argument really don't know nothing about the biblical context whatsoever. They try to make it seem like somehow Jesus Christ is completely different from God the Father, that somehow Jesus has a completely different view of homosexuality and transgenderism and all these other things versus what the Bible actually says. Well, here is Jesus in Matthew. Let's jump over to Matthew 19, where he's basically affirming the exact same thing that God said in Genesis 1. What is he saying here? And this is Matthew 19, 4 through 6. "And he answered them and said to them, Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this reason man shall leave his father and mother to be joined with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And then so they are no longer together, but two, but one flesh. Therefore God has joined them together. Let not man be separate." So Jesus talking, is quite literally affirming, I guess you want to use that term, affirming exactly what God the Father said in Genesis 1. So there is no difference here. There is no contradiction, as some people like to manufacture here. In order to believe that there's any kind of contradiction here, you would have to be quite literally trying to deceive people what the Bible actually says, which if you also go back to Genesis 1 is a thing that happened with Satan and Eve. We've mentioned that here last week. Also, one's joining us here as well. Diesel saying that God made man and weapon separate. They blurred the lines between the two and mock God. As we go on here tonight on this episode, I'm going to show you who exactly is the one leading this division, this blurring of the lines between male and female. And like I said, it's going to get more interesting here as the Bible goes, as the night goes on. So a lot of people will try to argue here that when you talk about the issue of transgender people, whether these are people who went from male to female, whether these people went to female to male, even your non-binary people, the ones who try to pretend like that somehow they're beyond male and female, and they don't identify with either or they're not going to try to pick this whole idea of, oh, there could be like a third gender. A lot of people will try to argue that in the Bible that somehow the Bible makes no mention of transgender people at all. They kind of use that as a way to deceive people into thinking that somehow God doesn't have a problem with transgenderism, right? Now, if you read Genesis 1, like I just did right there, clearly that is not true. There's only two options, and I don't care how many people this upsets, you have to hear this because it's the truth. There's only two options. You were either born a male or you were born a female. That's it. There's no amount of plastic surgery that you can do to yourself that's going to change that fact, not only in the reality, but in your own heart. Because in your own heart, if you're being completely honest with ourselves, even you know that you're still a man at heart, you're still a woman at heart. But society, or as I like to say, the world will like to tell you otherwise. Well, what does God say about this very issue? Because God's actually made a couple of decrees here about the transgenderism and this whole idea that a man can switch his gender or a woman can switch his gender. Here's what it says here. Let's go to Deuteronomy here. This is chapter 20. This is verse 16 through 18. Now, this is the first warning here. This is the first warning, and we'll get a lot deeper into this as time goes on here. But God is quite literally warning the Israelites when they were founding their nation, warning them about joining arms with the rest of the world and joining arms with the rest of these nations that were doing very, very wicked things in the eyes of the world. And I'm pretty sure if you guys have heard a few Gnostics and who've tried to use this argument, God is making a decree to quite literally wipe out the Canaanites. Like, he makes it very, very clear he wants all the Canaanites wiped out, man, woman, child, everyone, right? And what a lot of Gnostics will do is that they'll frame that as, oh my God, God is so mean, he's so bad that he's killing all these people, including children. He's killing the children, all because they don't want to obey him. That's an evil, bad God. Well, two things are happening here. One, when you get into the context of who we're talking about in the Canaanites, there were a lot of Nephilim in the land of Canaan during this time period. That's also very important. We've talked about the Nephilim in previous episodes, so I definitely want you to go back and check out those episodes for more context of who the Nephilim actually were. Doesn't frame them as innocent people, as some of those people would like you to believe. And another thing that was happening here is that the land of Canaan and the people in Canaan were quite literally worshiping demonic gods. And very, very important here, we'll get to this here in a second, but saying here that, but the cities of these people which the Lord your God has given you inheritance, you shall not say, you shall let nothing that breathes remain alive. You shall utterly destroy them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, just as your Lord your God has commanded to you. Lest they teach you according to all of their abominations which they have done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. So what is happening here? God is saying that do not take anything from these people, because quite literally all they know is evil. Everything that they do is according to their demonic gods. Everything that they do is abominations in the eyes of God, because they do these abominations to honor their God, which is why he wanted them completely wiped out. Then we're going to go even further here. Let's go over to Deuteronomy. This is 22:5 here. And there's a couple of instances here which makes it very, very clear how God feels about transgenderism in a nutshell here. This is 22:5. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. What is it saying here? We talked about order and kind of God's natural order. Anything that goes against God's natural order is an abomination to God. So when you have women who dress up as men, or men who dress up as women, going against their natural use, that is an abomination to the eyes of God. So keep in mind, when people in this community want to weaponize this against you, saying that, no, you're a bigot because you believe this, or you're a bad person because you believe this. Keep in mind, these people do not have a problem with you. They have a problem with God. They don't like that God does not decree these things. They have a problem with Christ, who does not decree these things. This is who they have an issue with. And you will see later on here that they actively rebel against God by promoting these ideologies here. And then jumping over to Deuteronomy, this is 23 here. It should be 23:1. I think we're only going to read 23:1 here. It says here that he who is emasculated by crushing or mutilation shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. Which means that, yes, during this time period, you're happening going back thousands upon thousands of years. So I know it's easy to look at the world today and think to yourself that, oh, this whole thing with the transgender movement started with Obama. He's been pushing this very, very hard. And just the Obama administration has, in fact, pushed LGBTQ politics very hard over the last 15 years or so. However, that is not where any of this started. It goes way back from the 70s, the 80s, the 60s. It goes way, way further back than there. This has been going on for thousands of years. Thousands of years. Like I said, since the very beginning of civilization, you've had people who have done these things, quite literally to rebel against God. Each man has a number to his days. I agree. So if they're an awesome one joining us here on this program as well. So you're seeing a pattern here. You're seeing a pattern, and you're noticing something very, very interesting. Let's just put it that way. You notice something very, very interesting. So this is what God has decreed not to do. So those who are trying to make arguments, and some people have tried to make arguments saying that, well, actually transgenders were in the Bible as the eunuchs. Eunuchs are not transgender. Let me be very, very clear here. The Bible gives a very clear description on who the eunuchs were. These were not people pretending to be women. These are not people pretending to be men. Like I said, to get deceived by that plot point really involves you not knowing anything about biblical scripture whatsoever. But what we saw here is that when you go even deeper, let's go to Deuteronomy 32 here. Now, this is where it gets very, very interesting because, as I said earlier, the reason why God wanted the Canaanites and other nations around here to be completely, utterly wiped out was because of the abominations that they were doing to their gods. Now, who are their gods? A lot of people say that no, these were essentially just made up figures of their imagination, and talking about like the golden bull and stuff like that. There's other people that says, well, wait a second. If you look at what was happening during the time of Noah, you had fallen angels here on the earth, mating with women, interacting with men, creating Nephilim. They were getting all of these information and all of this knowledge that they were passing down to humanity, causing abominations. So a lot of these false gods of the world, when you look at the countries like Rome, for instance, Greece, ancient Greece, you look at those, India is another great example of this. Maybe in fact that these entities were real, however they were fallen angels or even demons that they were worshiping here. Well, that's kind of what this verse is saying here. A little bit long here, we're going to read 32:16 through 25, and we're talking about one of those same nations here. And what does it say? It says they provoked him, which him being God here, just for the reference, they provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons, not God. So what is God saying here? That these people who are doing sacrifices to these false gods, a lot of them, if we're being completely honest with ourselves here, are in fact pagan gods during this time period. Now, pagans will love to say that everything that they believe in is not demonic when it comes to the witchcraft, the worship of these gods and goddesses and all this stuff. They say, no, it's not demonic. They're only saying that because just like their religion states here, they're completely rebelling against God. And so in their mind, well, your God isn't real, so what I'm doing is not demonic. Well, that's not really an argument. You can pretend like, a giant ship, a giant $400 million ship is not real, and instead try to make some kind of like loophole around this. It's like, just because you don't acknowledge it doesn't mean that it's not there. That's not how this whole thing works. So I'm be very, very cautious about that. But yeah, they were in fact worshiping and sacrificing things to demons. Continue here. To the gods they did not know, to the new gods, new arrivals that your fathers did not fear, or the rock that begot you not, who you are unmindful. It said, you have forgotten the God who fathered you. It says, and when the Lord saw it, he spurned them because of the propagation of his sons and daughters. He said, I will hide my face for them. I will see what their end will be, and they are a perverse generation. Children is in whom is no faith. They provoked me to jealousy by what is not God. They have moved me to anger by their foolish idols. I will provoke them to jealousy by the nation, by those who are not a nation. I will move them to anger by a foolish nation. And then it says that, for I will, for the fire kindled in my anger, I shall burn the lowest hell and consume the earth with her increase. I shall set fire to the foundations of the mountains. I will heap disasters on them. I will spin my arrows on them. I said, they shall be wasted with hunger, devoured by pestilence and bitter destruction. I will also send against them the teeth of beasts and the poison of serpents, of the dust. The sword shall destroy outside. There shall be terror within, from the young man and virgin, the nurturing child of the man with gray hairs. What is being said here? What he's saying is that because these people were worshiping demons, which is quite literally what they were doing, God quite literally put his wrath upon them. But we talk about a nation being under the judgment of God. When the nation decides that they're going to turn their back on God, God decides that he's going to turn their back on them. And this is a very common question that we get with a bunch of non-believers about, if God actually exists, why do bad things happen? And the perfect answer that you should give people when people ask that, because I know there's a lot of people out there that think that, oh, the world is just so terrible. There's so many murders and rapes and wars and all these bad things that are going on. It's like, how can God be real if all these things are happening? And they choose to not believe in God because of that. But what the Bible is telling us right here is that bad things happen in nations because they refuse to believe in God. They rebel against God and they turn their back on God. So as a result of them turning their back on God, God turns his back on them. And instead of being a nation blessed, you become a nation cursed. So very, very important to understand the context of what's being displayed here. And I have one more verse here before we really start getting into the meat and potatoes of this whole issue here. This is going over to Leviticus, and this I'm sorry, not Leviticus. Let's jump over to Ephesians here real quick. I'll get to Leviticus here in a second, but right now we're going to stick with Ephesians. And like I said, this is the verse that I talked about a little earlier, Ephesians 6:12, and I mentioned here, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but with principalities and the powers and the rulers of the darkness of this age and the spiritual hosts of the wickedness in the heavenly places. What is it saying here? It says that our battle, our enemy is not ourselves. Duke Nukem, thanks for joining us. I will explain to you in a moment, so stay tuned because it's going to be very important. But what the verse is saying here is that our problems, our enemy is not other human beings. It's not other people. And I know for a lot of Christians out there, it's very easy for them to look at the things that are happening with the LGBTQ community, whether it's gay people, lesbian people, trans people, whatever the case, the non-binaries, and think that these people are our enemies, these people are wicked, these people are doing wickedness in the eyes of God. Yeah, are they doing wickedness in the eyes of God? Yes. However, what does the Bible say? The Bible say that they are not our enemies. Why? Because our enemies is actually powers, principalities, which is what? Fallen angels, demonic spirits, and yes, even Satan himself. Because why? Because it are these entities that are essentially driving the same group of people here, the trans, the gay, the lesbian, all this other stuff. They're the ones driving them to commit sins and commit acts against God in hopes that those people who turn their back on God will ultimately end up in hell. This is quite literally a long game that the demonic forces are playing on our world right now. They know that they can't beat God. Why? Because they've already tried and they've already failed. The only thing that they can do against God is to get God's people to rebel against him in the hopes that one day those people are going to get cast off into hell. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to get cast off into hell as a result of this. Why? Because they've turned their back on God and they've turned their back on Christ. This is what the Bible teaches us here, but I want to make sure that we get this context going here. For this. Vanya saying wisdom, Jacob. Awesome says, looks like Ishtar. Like I say, you guys are jumping a little bit ahead of me here, but we will lump back into this. I always wonder why LGBTQ people follow into Satanism. Well, that's a question that we'll answer here in the next couple of weeks, but now we're not here tonight. Let's jump back into this here. So some of you guys may remember, so now we're going to get into the heart of this whole thing, because when we look at transgender people, right, from a very secular worldview, we look at this as just people who have one day decided for whatever reason that they simply want to be another gender. They don't want to be the gender that they were born with, or as the world tries to say, assigned with. They want a person who's a male and just feels like he's in the wrong body and wants to become a woman. So he turns trans, gets all these surgeries and hormones and all this stuff to become a woman. Same thing with a woman looking to become a man. And this has been a big issue here with the trans community for the last several years. And it's really reared its ugly head in the last 4 or 5 years. And what's happening here is that in a vacuum, you look at this as, oh, okay, well, this is just somebody who independently making the decision that they don't want to be in, the I guess you could say the gender that they were born with. They want to identify with another gender, a third gender, I guess you could say. And a lot of people think that, these people are just making natural decisions, that, hey, look, if this is a decision that you make, hey, that's on you. I'll respect, your pronouns. I'll respect, who you are as a human being and all this, old stuff. But what no one looks at, and like I said, if you don't see God in what's happening in the world today, none of this is going to make sense. But what you don't see is that, well, if there is a God, there actually has to be a devil as well. And when you look at transgender people, it's not just someone simply making the decision to change their gender or to change their ideology. They're quite literally when somebody changes their gender from male to female or female to male, it's literally a form of worship. They are literally forming a worship of an ancient deity that has been warned about in the Bible for many, many years. Some people will not believe me here, but let's use this as an example. And I'm going to show you two examples that should really going to drive this home. Now, some of you guys may remember about I want to say this about a month ago. I think this movie came out a month ago, but it was a movie called Monkey Man. And I did a couple of videos on this on the YouTube. I actually did a review on this on the Barroom episodes too. So me, Rob, Rick all talked about this. Monkey Man is a terrible movie. It's not a good movie. However, going into it, we didn't even know going into it that there was going to be a trans angle to the movie. And what I mean by this trans angle? Well, in the film here, and I guess we'll pop this up to kind of show you here in a second. In the film, the movie is highlighting and quite literally celebrating a indigenous trans community in the country of India that are called the Hijra, right? And they're a group of, in the way that it's portrayed in the film is much different than the way that they're portrayed in real life. But in the film, they were kind of like this group of ancient indigenous warriors who essentially were ostracized by the government in India. They got tossed out. They were basically forced into hiding. They're victims of the Great Oppression. However, towards the end of the film, they end up becoming like some kind of like super ancient badass warriors, which doesn't really make much sense in the context here. But I'm going to show you guys this quick video here. And this is from Now This. So keep in mind, using very secular sources here, and I'm gonna show you what they were being portrayed here as the Hijra community in this movie called Monkey Man. So just watch a little bit of this video here.
We need to talk about these characters in Monkey Man because did you know they're actually celebrating an often marginalized community? This is Alpha, a mentor of Dev Patel's character Kid, a transgender woman and a leader of a Hijra community. In India, Hijra are part of a group called third gender people. Some identify as transgender, but many see themselves as neither male nor female, but a different gender altogether. They've been around for thousands of years, and even today it's estimated that about 3 million third gender people live in India. Throughout most of history, the Hijra community was well respected and thought to have special religious powers. They often even had important roles in Hindu texts and ceremonies. But this changed with British colonization, which criminalized their existence. And a lot of this prejudice has carried to today. They often face extreme discrimination. It actually was
I have to stop right there just for a second. You notice how they snuck that in there? Very, very subtle. Like I said, this is Now This. So this is not, Breitbart or like Fox News. This is a left-wing source here. But you notice very subtly they snuck in that, this whole thing of transgenderism and the third gender was fine until the British came in and started colonizing everything. And then all of a sudden, all these people became victims. Pay attention to this because this is going to come back around when we really hit this point home here, but I'm going to continue with the video.
Which criminalized their existence. And a lot of this prejudice has carried to today. They often face extreme discrimination. It actually wasn't until 2014 that the Supreme Court of India ruled that third gender could even be recognized on official documents. So a lot of modern representation of Hijra in media has been less than flattering, but Patel has flipped the script in his directorial debut. The Hijra community actually joined Kid to fight against corruption. In previous interviews, Patel has said that this is an anthem for the underdog, the voiceless, the marginalized. I really wanted to include the Hijra community, the third gender in India. You look at old carvings in the temples in India and the freedom, the sexuality, the philosophy, all of it was so ahead of its time.
So literally, you heard that there too. He said straight out, we even played this about a month ago when we did the review of the movie. The reason why he wanted to highlight this group of people is because he thought that these Indian transgender people were so far ahead of their time and they're so far ahead of the rest of the world because look at how progressive they were. They're just so out and open about their sexuality and their sexual identity and all this other stuff that only the rest of the world can catch up with them. That's kind of what he was alluding to here, that it's the rest of the world that's behind these people here, and that's why we're seeing so many problems in our society here. Now, the problem here with this, however, is that this only shows you a very, very, let's just put it this way, it only shows you a very, very small portion of what's actually going on with this community here. Now, in the movie, the way that they're portrayed, like I said, they're a group of indigenous warriors. They come back around towards like the end of the movie, and then they fight, the bad guys, the oppressors, I guess you could say. But there's one thing that I noticed about this film that no one actually talks about, and is the religious aspect of it, because we are talking about a nation in India that is heavenly Hindu. So Hindu, we talked about this a little bit when I talked about my Nephilim series. I haven't done a complete episode about Hinduism per se just yet, but I did touch up on it on that series. What I was talking about there is that during this time period, during the flood, even after the flood, India was one of the countries that was very linked to fallen angels, to Nephilim, to demonic figures, demonic characters. And what India did is that, because Christianity wasn't not present in their religion, even to this day is a very, very small minority, but to this day, all these as you say, Hindu gods that were being worshipped throughout this time period were essentially all just fallen angels or demonic beings of that era. It's even very, very interesting. I think Hindu, they never really tell you the exact number of gods that they worship, because they just have an absolute multitude of gods that are worshipped there. And they said, some people said it's as many as like 30 million different types of gods there, right? So it's like, that's kind of the thing they believe. They'll believe in quite literally any god except for the God of the Bible. That's where they are here. Dude, it says pagan gods as well, pagans as well, like I said. And what you'll see here is that, I mentioned this here before too, when you really start studying a lot of these false religions, a lot of the let's say aspects of these religions really interlap with one another, and that's why you have certain gods that go by different names all across the world, right? So you'll hear of like a certain goddess, let's put it that way. In one country it's called this, in one country it's called that. So if you go to Babylon, it's given this name. If you go to Syria, it's given this name. If you go to Greece, it's given this name. You go to Rome, it's going this name. India is given this name. Yeah, when you really talk about the goddess or the goddess itself, it's really the exact same thing. They're the exact same idea, just with a completely different name. Especially with Kai and Shiva are the worst of, or Kali and Shiva are the worst of them all. Well, let's talk about this, because this is something that, like I said, they completely gloss over in the film. They don't really tell you about, is that this community that was given a highlight in this Monkey Man movie, which I believe was Universal. If I'm not mistaken, somebody could correct me if I'm wrong there, but I believe Universal was the one that produced this movie. Is that these individuals do in fact worship a god. Like, they're following, when this community of transgenders are quite literally following a worship of a god. And it's very, very interesting what they're doing in order to fall in line with the worship of this god too. So the Hira, or the Indian transgender people, they are referred to as a third gender. Now, as we know in the Bible, there is no such thing as a third gender. There is no third option. So the fact that they've even tried to create one and normalize one, once again, we're going completely against what God taught. This is why I said here, it's like, it's important when you're looking at these stories and you're looking at these religions, you have to look at it as the fact that God actually exists. Because the reason why so many people lose the plot about this is that there's this thing think that God's just some made up figure who doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, and they don't understand that they're living in the world that's rebelling against God, because they think that God isn't real, which is quite funny to me, because if God wasn't real, why are there so many communities all over the world that rebel against him as a result? But these transgender individuals here, surprised to absolutely no one, these were people who were feminine and identified people assigned male at birth. That's how they try to dress it up. So in other words, these are people who are born male who dress feminine and basically identify as a transgender person in the country of India. Many of them are sex workers. Shocker there, that a lot of these transgender people are sex workers who have sex with more powerful people for a multitude of things. So yes, prostitution is in fact a big angle here. That's very important. It will come back around here. Some of these people are quote they're intersex because they've quite literally removed their genitals. Let's just put it that way. They've removed the penis, scrotum, and testicles in order to fit more in line with their transgender ideology here. But here's the big thing that really doesn't get talked about here. But this article right here is one of the few that actually does talk about the Hindu goddess that is worshipped by India's transgender community. So these are not people who are just transgender just for the sake of being transgender. No, they're transgender because they're idolizing and they're essentially following and worship a Hindu god that demands them to be transgender. It's very, very interesting because when I first read this, I noticed a lot of similarities to another god we'll talk about here in a second, but we'll get to this here. So like I said, this is a article that's really trying to romanticize here, so I'm going to read a lot of this kind of in quotation marks, but obviously there's a lot of Hindu gods that have let's just say featuristics of both male and female. If you study Hinduism enough, a lot of their gods are either, you know, androgynous, or they're transgender, or they have both features of male and female. Now, I find it very interesting here, just based off of this real quick, that when we talk about fallen angels here, you're talking about angels who lost their heavenly state and were neither male nor female. Why? Because they were created angels. They weren't created to be men like me and you. So when you see that in context here, there's a lot of little subtle hints there that let you know about what's actually going on here. There's actually another little subtle hint that I might save for another episode, but notice how a lot of the Hindu gods, when they're portrayed in pictures, they're all portrayed in the color of blue. I'm not sure how many people may have noticed this or not, but have you ever realized that there's a lot of portrayals, I should say, in media that shows demonic characters as blue? Has anyone ever made that connection before? That's a topic for another day, but maybe it's something to think about for a future episode here. But so here we're going to get to the worship part of this, and what's the Bhuchara Mata is the name of this powerful pivotal Hindu deity. Now, this is how they describe this Hindu god, quote unquote, right? It says that who enjoys the patronage of transgender and transvestite in India. There are several different tales and folklores depicting an unmistakable gender transformation, thus shredding the trappings of heteronormativity. And then there weren't any such direct references to homosexuality in Hindu literacy texts, but there are several of a fluid nature of sexuality here. So I find it very interesting when you go even deeper here to what's being told here. But it says that one myth tells us that she was traveling with her sisters in a caravan with a bandit named Papaya, I'm just going to call that name, accosted them on the journey. It was common for both men and women in the Charan community to kill themselves when faced with the prospects of being overpowered and killed by enemies, and the shedding of blood of the caravan was considered abominable. I don't know how many people read that and went, wait, what? It was normal for yes, it just read it there. It was common for these people, both men and women, to kill themselves when faced with the prospect of being overpowered by their enemies. And this is the early example here of these people following this false demonic god here. And it continues here by saying that the sisters announce Trey Gru here, which is a form of self-mutilation. Upon being attacked, the legend is that they would cut off their breasts, with the Bartolo cursing to the life the impotency, where he unless he dressed and acted like a woman and worshipped her for the rest of his days. And then the underlying message here was simple: impotence or genital mutilation are the recurring themes and tales associated with this Hindu god that is referred to as the god of transgender people in India. So, a lot to take in here for a second. So let's kind of rewind here and explain what just happened. This demon god from the Hindu religion that is the god of transgender people, who this big movie just came out not too long ago, highlighting, praising, and glorifying these people. This god in its origin has origins to transgenderism, to mutilation, to suicide, and to quite literally curses. So one of the big things here is that the reason why a lot of these men were dressing up as women was because they were doing so in order to keep the, off the ire of this demonic god that they were presented with, that would have cursed them had they had not quite literally changed their gender. You see a lot of the women were cutting off their breasts. A lot of the men were cutting off their genitalia here. Now, I know Duke Nukem's brain is like already imploding here, saying that this is insane. By the way, Duke, we're only getting started here. This is only a preview of a much creepier revelation that will come here. But doesn't this not mirror a lot of the issues that you guys see in the trans community today? Now, I know this is talking about an Indian trans community, so there's not a direct parallel or agree, but are you not seeing the same spirit of this here in the United States with, let's just say, the American trans community? You're looking at people who are women trying to transition into men, and as a result, they are cutting off their breasts in order to more affirm their male identity here. The same thing you'll see with men converting to women. They will cut off their genitalia here. And what you're seeing here is that there's been a folklore, quite literally, in at least in the Hindu society for thousands of years. So this is not anything new. Like I said, we're seeing these abominations with our own two eyes now. We think that this is some kind of new phenomenon here. It's actually not a new phenomenon. This is something that's been going on here for quite some time. It says here that Jethro dreamt of this this Mata god here, saying that one day who ordered him to cut off his genitals, wear women's clothes, and become her servant. The Bachara Mata has consistently over these stories appeared as a figure identified impotent men and commanded them to do this to serve her, so that if they refused to assume the attire and the mannerisms of the opposite gender, they would be cursed in the next 7 incarnations to be born impotent. And thus the cult and the devotees who worship this one grew the community. They were required to self-castrate themselves and remain celibate. The stories also speak of the conflict between body and soul that transgenders go through, or of such a gender identity, and from the ancient stories of their time. So now they're saying here that there were stories of these individuals who saw dreams and visions of this demon god that ordered them to cut off their genitalia and to wear women's clothes to become a servant of the demon god. Now, what did I just read to you guys in Deuteronomy here not too long ago? I read this in, I think it was 23 and I want to say 22 and 23. I just read this here. God quite literally demanded against one putting on women's clothing, whether you are a man wearing women's clothing or a woman wearing male's clothing, completely forbidden. It said it was abomination. And then he also forbade anyone cutting off their genitalia as well. So this is what God decreed in his word. And here you have on the other side of the world in India here, you're having demons quite literally manifesting themselves, telling the people to quite literally do the exact opposite of what God told them to do. And if they did not do so, that they would be a curse put upon them, right? Now, these are all communities, by the way, that do not have Christianity as a stronghold in these nations. So they don't have a Bible. Quite literally, they did not have a Bible to look for and be like, well, wait a second, no, God said this, and now you, this entity, this quite literally would say angel light, or this demon is telling me that I have to do exactly what God said not to do, or else you're going to curse me. Now, they didn't have the knowledge of God, they didn't have the wisdom of God to know that this was a demonic deception. And very, very sadly, to this day, if you look at the nation of India, they still don't have the wisdom and the word of God to avoid these deceptions. So this entire community that's being celebrated here is quite literally doing this to serve a false demon god, because they believe that if they don't do this, that they're going to essentially lose prosperity and be cursed as a nation and as a people. This is what you're seeing here. So keep in mind, the whole context here is that there's always something demonic behind closed doors when you remove God from your society. And this is what I say here. We talked about this, that there's no third choice when it comes to gender. It's either male or female. There is no third option. As much as they want to try to create a third option, it doesn't exist. And in just the same way, there is no third option to where it comes to being either for God or against God. You are either for Christ or you are against Christ. There is no in between, because when you remove God from your society, when you remove God from your country, Satan is going to take over. There is no in between. There is no, well, maybe we can just stay out of it. There is no staying out of it. There is no, well, I'm just going to pretend like neither one of these guys exists so I don't have to pick a side. You're still picking the side of Satan at the end of the day. It's literally what you're doing. I know Hinduism is demonic, but even I didn't know that this is extreme. Yeah, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. Like I said, people don't understand, like, this is the spirit of what's actually going on here. And Buddhism and New Age are heavy in Hollywood. Doesn't surprise me. Yep, that's another thing. Like I said, when you remove God, this is what happens here. It says Mata means mother. I was gonna bring this up here too. I guess we can circle back around to this next point. Is that when I read this, and I read what this demon god that everyone was worshiping was saying and whatnot, and what all of these things that were going on here, I thought to myself, Man, I've heard these warnings before. Like I've heard these warnings before. I know that this whole thing, this is not new. And when I heard the story of this Indian community, I immediately got brought back to the Bible. And if you guys read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, because it really hammers it down in the Old Testament more than the New Testament, you'll notice something right away. Throughout the entire Old Testament, when you're reading from Genesis all the way to, I believe, Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but when you read this, you'll notice here that there is a dark demonic trinity in the Bible. In the Bible, God is constantly telling his people to not follow the people who follow these demon gods. And there's 3 demon gods in this dark trinity the Bible constantly warns you about. And keep in mind, if God is warning you about something, he's doing it for a reason. He's not naming these entities to waste his own time or to placate himself. He's doing this to give you a warning of something that is very, very dark and something that is very, very sinister that's taking over a lot of these nations here. The 3 demon gods that he warns against the most are Baal, Molech, and Ishtar. Now, very, very interesting here with Ishtar. This is a female goddess, quote unquote, but we know by the Bible it's a demon god here. However, this female goddess has been present all over the world. Now, they said the origins of this goes all the way back to Babylon, right? So the origin of this demonic entity goes back to Babylon. However, she has spread all across the world because when you look at these other cultures, when you look at these other societies, is like they all have a false goddess that has a origin story, a kind of a method, and kind of a description that is very, very similar to Ishtar. However, the name is changed here. So even in the Bible itself, Ishtar goes by a number of names. She goes by Ashtaroth, Ashtar, Ishtar, Isis, Anana, the Queen of Heaven. Yes, she is referred to as the Queen of Heaven in the Bible too. So I know I'm going to upset my Catholic friends again, but I need to let you guys know this. The only reference to a Queen in Heaven in the Bible refers to a demon god. So when you're using the demon god, when you're using the Queen of Heaven, the Bible's telling you there is no Queen of Heaven. The Queen of Heaven does not exist. And I know people will say, well, no, when we use the Queen of Heaven, we're talking about Mary. There are many, many names for this Ishtar, Queen of Heaven, that's in the Bible. She deceives multiple nations by going by multiple names here. So I want to shoot this off here just real quick. Let's jump over to Leviticus because I want to really just hit this home with the demon war. So I told you I hit this back up again. Here we go. Leviticus 17:7. And I want you guys to really pay attention to this. If you guys didn't catch this here in the first half, pay attention here. It says, once again, talking about these people who worship these demon gods, where I know specifically they're talking about like Canaanites and kind of the pagan nations. But as we see here, this demon worship has spread worldwide. It's not just confined to this one nation. There's a lot of nations that go here. But it says, they shall no more offer their sacrifices to demons after whom they have played the harlot. And this shall be the statute forever and for them throughout their generations. So once again, the Bible is telling you these people are worshiping demons. So when you look at the Bible here in this context, the one sin that God warns about the most out of all sins, and there's a lot of sins in the Bible, but the one that he quite often goes after the most is idolatry. It is the worship of other gods who are not him. Because first of all, there is no other god outside of God, period, right? These entities will call themselves God. They like to be worshipped as God. We know Satan likes to be worshipped as God. So he'll go around the world and set up a whole bunch of religions that view themselves as a god just so that he can get worshipped through these people. God's saying that there is no other God outside of me. But let's go back here to Deuteronomy one more time. This is the warning against idolatry. And in verse 4, this is 15 through 19 here. And who is he warning against? He's warning against these people who create false demonic gods. Take careful heed of yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at the Hobreth and outside of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make for yourselves a carved image of a form of any figure in the likeness of male and female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, of the likeness of a winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish in the water. Take heed, lift your eyes to heaven, and you'll see the sun, the moon, the stars, and the host of heaven. You feel driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord your God has given all peoples under the heaven as a heritage. What is it warning here? He's saying that there's a lot of people in the world right now that have created gods out of images of birds, out of images of sea animals, of land animals, of beasts, of men, of women. And I'm pretty sure you guys can think of a few examples in your own mind off the top of your head about individuals who have done this quite literally in their own community here, right? So here's where it starts getting interesting. This is where you really start getting to the reveal portion of this, because I mentioned Ishtar here. I mentioned this whole idea of what this demon god does, what this demon god represents. I want to use another secular source here because this is really going to show you home, because the reason why I like using these secular sources here is that they really expose to you what's really going on if you're paying attention. Because like I said, this is not a Christian site that's trying to make, people like look bad or sound bad. Because the first thing that's going to happen here is that when I read this to you, someone's going to be like, oh, well, you're misinterpreting what that says, or the source that you're using doesn't know what you're talking about. I'm using your own source, and this is what you guys describe in your own circles here. So if you're trying to say that what this is saying is not true, that's because you're trying to deceive people away from what the truth really is. And there's a reason why it's called mystery religion in the Bible. There's a reason why that name is hammered over and over again. Real quick, I'm going to catch up on a couple of messages here before I move on. We mercenaries were warned away from going to India. It's a very dangerous nation. Even the State Department warned us against it. Yeah, like I said, it's a very, very dangerous nation. But like I said, when you're in a nation that worships quite literally millions and millions of demons, they're going to be very, very hostile to anything that has anything to do with Christ. That's just the reality of the situation. Hinduism is demonic. Mentioning that your meditation is how you can get demon possessed. A lot of people talked about this. Yoga has been a big topic tier too, and it wasn't too long ago when I heard that yoga is demonic, and you hear that yoga is demonic, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. And because we're in the US and you have so many people out there who preach and normalize yoga, you just don't think of it as demonic, right? So you just think of, oh, it's just an exercise, it's just the way to stretch and whatnot. You sit there in a hot room and it's all fine. But then when you really start digging into the origins of this religion, and you start realizing that, wow, a lot of this stuff actually came out of this Hindu religion, out of this demonic religion, and you start realizing, well, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't be playing around with this stuff here, because if these people are worshiping demons, and these are essentially the revelations that they have given us that may be demonic in origin, this is probably something that God told us to completely flee away from here. And Leslie says that Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. Thank you for bringing that up. Don't forget Syrians and the Akkadians. Yeah, we'll talk about them here in a second, because like I said, this is going to encompass whole communities here. Yoga is very haram. I believe it now. Yeah, I have no disagreement with that whatsoever. So let me exit a couple of things here. Here we go. So now I'm going to start blowing you guys' mind with some of this information here. So let's look at LGBTQ in the ancient world. Let's just kill that here for a second, because we don't need that. So this article was created and crafted, I should say, a couple of years ago. And what they were trying to prove here is that, well, it's the Christians that are the bad people because they won't accept homosexual relations, they won't accept transgender relations, and they try to say that it's an abomination. However, when you look at the ancient world was full of homosexuality. It was full of sexual acts and sexual fluidity and whatnot, and all these other cultures were doing it for thousands of years. So clearly it's the Christians here who are the problem. However, like I said, that's just spinning a complete inversion what the Bible is actually telling us here. But it gets very, very interesting when you look at specifically some of these nations and the gods who are being worshipped here. So once again, when someone is practicing homosexuality, when someone is practicing transgenderism or whatever the case may be, it's not just one isolated person doing something by his own decision. You're seeing here that there is a spirit of worship that is going on along with these people. And even this is a secular source, will admit to this, because when we talk about this Ishtar demon god that is warned against heavily in the Bible, you start seeing what people were doing in order to give worship to this entity here. So let's go here. Meslo Pedamia. I know I could butcher this name a lot because I was just looking at this the other day. I believe this is modern day Iraq. if I'm not mistaken, which if you go to the history of Iraq, it's kind of insane when you compare what Iraq, modern Iraq to ancient Babylon, and there's so many similarities there, and it's very, very interesting when you look at this. But here's what they were saying here about the goddess Ishtar, which, like I said, is a demon god in the Bible. The priest and the priestess of the popular goddess Inanna, like I said, this god has many, many names all over the world. Like, it depends on what country you go to, it has a completely different name, but it's the same god. Inanna here, all better known as Ishtar, were both bisexual and transgender. So first line here off the gate, what is it saying here? That the priest and the priestess of Ishtar, the people who are representing this demon god, all identified with bisexual and transgender, which means that they were both doing homosexual acts, and some of them were even dressing up as women, being transgender, having this third option. So these were what the priestess of this demon religion were actually representing here. Very interesting. One of the aspects of the goddess was the most inspiring ability to turn men into women and women into men, the power of transformation. So I'll stop there again. That's the second sentence of here. They said that this goddess had the ability to turn men into women and women into men, and they did this as a form of worship to Ishtar. Those says that yoga is about emptying your mind and opening the universe, letting demons in. The Bible says meditate on the word of God. And if anything, I agree. Bisexual, transgender, how does that work? Like I said, it's basically homosexuality and transgenderism. That's really what's going down to. So on second thought, probably best I didn't know. Yeah, that is. But like I said, listen to what it's saying here. Like I said, this is a secular source. It's not a Bible-inspired source at all. They're saying that this goddess quite literally turned men into women and women into men. So this goddess here, this false demon god by the Bible, was quite literally responsible for the gender confusion of the ancient world. So this entity was quite literally making people change their gender for woman to male, male to female, creating transgenders on top of this. And what you see here is that quite literally this entity is viewed as quite the birthplace or the birth entity of the third gender fluidity, sexual fluidity. So everything that you're seeing in the LGBTQ umbrella can quite literally be traced back to this demon god. That's kind of crazy when you think about it here, especially considering the fact how many times this demon god is warned about in the Bible. Like, if you really want to get into it on your own time, go look up or go read the book of Judges, the book of First Samuel. You can read the book of First Kings, Second Kings, Jeremiah. Obviously, when we talk about the Queen of Heaven, those are all books that very, very strongly condemn this demon god that was being worshipped around the entire world during this time period. But continue here says that her father god, Enki, or his name, is said to have created a third gender that was neither male or female, who became Inanna's servants of her clergy. So what do you talk about here with a third gender? This neither male nor female. What is this? Well, this is something that goes all the way back to ancient Babylon here. And what do we see this manifested as today? We see this manifested as today as non-binary. This is what this is. This whole idea that I'm not going to identify with either male or female. I'm going to be non-binary. Now, we've seen this being popularized heavily in the last 5 years or so, where there's a lot of people now that are coming out saying that they're non-binary. Let's be very honest. The overwhelming majority of them are women who don't want to identify with anything feminine, but they don't want to go full trans. So they just say that I'm non-binary. That's what you see here. Well, all of this goes back literally to this demonic god of Ishtar, who is said to have created the third gender. So this false god is being credited with creating the third gender that still exists to this day. So here's what this article says, what I find very, very interesting here. And it is today referred to as non-binary gender, was recognized for over 3,000 years ago as a third gender created by the divine will. The gods also blessed same-sex relationships, as clearly seen in the document, the Almanac of Incantations, which contains prayers for both opposite and same-sex couples. This is where it gets very interesting. A man who had sex with a man of his own social status was thought to bring good fortune and prosperity society, while only trouble would come to a same-sex relationship with someone with a below one status. But the same was believed with opposite sex. This same paradigm applies to ancient cultures of status that include what matters of not what involve what mattered and not their sex. So what is this telling you here? Is that not only was transgenderism a key aspect here of this demonic worship, but so was homosexuality. And why were you seeing these ancient cultures engaging in homosexuality? It wasn't because they were just two men who loved each other and just wanted to be happy and be left alone like the world tells you that it is. No, they were actively doing this because they thought that they can get prosperity and fortune by worshiping this god Ishtar. And why would they do that? Because Ishtar, according to the Bible, or according to I guess you could say ancient lore here, was considered to be the goddess of love, war, and fertility. So these people were engaging in homosexual and transgender acts, and under the guise that this demon god was going to bless them with fertility and great fortune and great blessings by doing these acts. So they convinced themselves quite literally that by doing these acts, which keep in mind in the context, completely abomination against God, they thought that by doing these things that they were going to earn the blessing of this false goddess. And this goddess is still being worshipped to this very day. Very, very important to notice this here. You see the same thing in Egypt. Like I said, this entity has outreach in many cultures here. But you see, in Egypt, the gender fluidity identity was recognized in Egypt with its long history. It was drew little to no condemnation except for when a male of a certain status played the part of a woman in sex. Bisexuality in a male was accepted as natural and never drew adverse comment. Keep in mind, this is the same nation that was all deceived by the same God here. But passive homosexuality made Egyptians uneasy. Basically saying here that if a male was too feminine in being, in homosexual acts, then that would make some of the Egyptians uneasy here. But the only problem the Egyptians had with same-sex relationships was a show of weakness over femininity in certain males of status. Although Egyptians respected the power of the feminine, as evidenced by their female deities, one of them being Ishtar, shocking, they did not believe that mortal women could effectively wield power. It says that there was no concept of homosexual in Egypt, only relationships. When male and male relations were mentioned negatively, it has to do with male surrendering his masculine role in sex, not in a relationship. So they said that male on male sex was fine in Egypt as long as there wasn't a power dynamic involved into this. Let me be very, very clear about this too. There's a reason why there's a couple of nations where when you talk about it in biblical context, the Bible really has nothing positive to say about it whatsoever. Egypt is one of those nations. Like, it really is. And then, of course, you have the Romans as well. Same entity, same worship here. And they said that in the same model of the Greeks, an older man in society, a relationship with a youth who would benefit from it. In Greece, the sexual aspect of this relationship was least important, and they have to be genuine affection and respect shared by both parties for their association to be considered honorable. So did you hear that right? It said that a relationship with a youth. So it's talking about pedophilia. Just in case you guys didn't catch that there, it is in fact talking about an older man having a relationship with a young boy. And you saw that in Greece, and we saw that in Rome. This whole thing of passive relationships for an older man and a youth. This is what it says right here. The great Stoic philosopher, quote unquote, exclusively favored male relationships. The classic model of these was for an older man, a lover, to court and win the affections of a youth, a young boy, who would then be cultivated, cultured, and improved by the relationship. The Spartans encouraged male-on-male relationships, and their levels will fight more effectively to oppress and protect their beloved. This paradigm you saw in same-sex lovers, you saw this all in Greece, and basically Rome modeled that exact same thing. So what are we all seeing here? We're seeing this over and over again. We're talking about the same sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if you look at a map of where ancient Sodom and Gomorrah was, and you look at some of these other nations, they weren't very far away from Babylon, wasn't very far away from Rome, wasn't very far away from Egypt, and all these other nations here. So the sins that you saw in Sodom and Gomorrah that God literally destroyed that nation for, you see the exact same sins being played out in all these other nations here. It's like Rome once again saying that this primarily had to do with anal intercourse, allowing oneself to be penetrated. No other sexual act or position was criticized. Famous Caesar was in a gay relationship and made attention to disparage his character from assuming a passive role in sex. And this is talking about, the Roman Empire, Caesar, and the things that he did, behind closed doors too. But all of this is just a repeat over and over again of the same sexual depravity that we saw from Sodom and Gomorrah, and now we're seeing it being spread in the name of this demon goddess Ishtar that was, like I said, multiple names around multiple nations, but it was all the same over and over again. So the point of that article from a secular source was trying to say that, well, this was normal back then. Like there was no issue about it. There was no stigma against homosexuality back here. So clearly it's the Christians that had it wrong. No, the Christians actually didn't have it wrong. The Christians was the one that said that, yes, this was the abominations to the Lord that these other nations were doing here. This engaging with sexual acts with other men, with children, cutting off their genitalia, cutting off their breasts. These were all acts that these individuals were doing to serve as worship to false demon gods that they were worshiping outside of the God of the Bible. Because every time you go against the God of the Bible, you will always fall into demonic worship. And guess what? This demonic worship is trying to get you to do things that are going to be an abomination in the eyes of God, which means that if you do not repent and turn to Christ before the end of your life, your only destination will be the lake of fire and in the second death. This is the game that's being played here too. So I'll catch up with some of you guys too. The New Age guru said back then that the day that it was bisexual, most of his talks were from the 70s and 80s. Yeah, this is going way further back than there. And in public too. No, have you seen some of the pride parades in San Francisco? It is very, very public. Greco-Roman times, which was disgusting. So Carrie's been going over the young stuff a lot lately. It's very important because, like I said, that's the one aspect, and I think we kind of touched up on this a little bit here. We did the 01 podcast this week over at Bounding in the Comics, and the problem is that in the LGBTQ community right now, there's this. They say it's only a small minority, but there's this group in there, let's be very, very real here, they're pedophiles, and they're trying to use the LGBTQ as a way to engage in their own sexual depravity by saying that, hey, we're a part of this community, so we should be normalized too. And that's really the last leg of, if we normalize that, but we're sitting here in 2024, we've normalized everything else up to this point, why would we not normalize that too? You know what I mean? So like it's there, and it's always been there. Like they're telling you, their own sources are telling you that, no, this is the way that it's been for thousands of years. It's like, yeah, that's the problem. It says it sounds gay. They use the power play to show their dominance over others. Yeah, probably. I mean, look, you see that a lot in prisons, right? You see that in modern prisons every day about how people use sexual acts as a show of dominance against others too. So we see that to this day. Leslie says, sounds like the Roman Catholic Church. Francis dines with transgenders every day, according to the Vatican. It also will explain a lot of the acts that, some Roman Catholics have with young boys, because it was going on in the ancient times too in Rome. So why would it not continue to this very day? Nambla, Glad, all that. So when you start getting even deeper here, this is where my jaw kind of dropped a little bit, because when I was researching this, I was going to come for a different angle to the story here, but I noticed here that no, there's a pretty big, powerful connection here with this demonic god of Ishtar. That a lot of the things that are happening in the world can all be traced back to Ishtar, and we know the Bible warns guys. So I started doing more research. What are some things about this Ishtar entity here that maybe we should be like looking into? What are some of the things that were going on here during this time period that we can look back to? And I went back to this conversation. I think this is a very important video here, because I do actually have some other sources here that can back up what's being said. So this is a conversation that that Vlad Savachuk, I believe is his name here, had with a rabbi. I want to make sure that I get his name right here, because I don't see it in the tagline here. I think it's Jonathan Call, if I believe his name too. So they were having this conversation essentially about, what did the world look like during the time of Ishtar worship around the world. What was actually going on? What was actually being done here? And what you see there is that in ancient times, a lot of the stuff that you're seeing today is not new. What you're seeing here is that the people who are doing these things today were doing it because they were honoring the god of this Ishtar woman, and you're gonna start seeing a lot of scary parallels here between modern day and ancient time, especially with this community. This is where you start to realize here that this is not just some one person makes a decision that's completely out of the random. No, this is a very much a spiritual demonic what was the best way to say it? This is definitely a dark spirit that's moving not only just in our world but all over the planet right here. And real quick, I'll just address this. I don't agree with Wretched Radio, but he described a playbook used by leftist church to compromise the church. They got their foot in the door by elevating women to higher positions in the church. Yeah, and like I said, I talked about that a few weeks back with when you deny the Apostle Paul, that this is essentially what happens here. But I want the list. We're going to play a little bit of this here, and I really want you guys to listen to essentially what they're saying here about what people did during this time period to worship this demon god of Ishtar.
There's another side to this Ashtoreth, this Ishtar, and the thing is, it comes with, notice it's all from the sexual revolution. So that's the goddess where you're going to get something else now. And in her, when I looked at her ancient tablets, her ancient inscriptions, she says, I am a woman, I am a man. It says in her hymns, it says, you, goddess, have the power to turn a man into a woman and turn a woman into a man. So this is the goddess, the principality of the destruction of gender, androgyny, merging male and female, blurring female and male, blending men and women, merging them. And that is why we are all watching this in our culture right now. It is a spirit. It is not natural. And it is this exact principality that is affecting everything. And the thing is that
it's going to be very, very important here, because when we wrap this thing up, we're going to link this back around to a warning that's given in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. And it's talking about the harlot of Babylon. And when you really listen to what God is saying, that this warning that he's given about this harlot of Babylon, and then you start listening to what this demigod Ishtar was doing, it really makes you wonder if they're talking about the same entity. Now, keep in mind, that could be a very big white pill towards the end, but right now it's pretty scary. But let's continue here.
It couldn't happen earlier because it was too radical. So, the 1960s America, it was too radical for that. They just come out. But what happens is, as this sexual goddess, as this goddess of sexual immorality, as she gets entrenched in the culture, her darker work starts coming out. And we are in now the next phase. That's why we're...
And really what he's saying here is that, like I said, once you remove God from society, like I said, you can't have God, you can't have Jesus and Ashtar. You can't have both. So usually when Ishtar grows in her community is when people reject God, when they reject Christ, and then her influence grows. And when the divinity of Christ is pretty much removed from a society, from a nation, then what you're going to have here is just complete demonic influence, which means that your nation is going to get even more depraved as time moves on here. And that's where a lot of the real dark stuff begins to happen.
We're all dealing with this now. That's why it's affecting literally everything. And I'll give you an example. It says you grind away the masculinity of men. So now before it's beyond, it's not just the sexual realm, it's every realm. Look what's happening in our culture. There is actually a war on manhood. There's a war on, that she seeks to take men away from manhood, away from fatherhood, away from marriage, away from providing, away from women, And so because she grinds that away, she seeks to feminize them. She was actually the goddess who hated the patriarchy. She hated any kind of authority with men. Well, this you can all...
And how everyone's seeing this today in our culture, like right now, we're all seeing this. We need to show women as men. We need to show men as women. We see this completely perverted in our media, in our society. This whole idea that masculinity is toxic, but if a female shows signs of masculinity, then it's good again. And it's all confusion. It's all perversion. And what you're seeing here is that there is a demonic spirit behind it.
this spirit is so thick in our culture, you can cut it with a knife. It is so thick. If a man acts masculine, they'll say that's toxic. If a woman acts masculine, they'll say, bravo, that's wonderful. What is that? That is this spirit. It's crazy. Well, it also says she masculinizes, she defeminizes women. So her job is also to take women away from womanhood, away from motherhood, away from marriage, away from men. Well, we're watching it happen. It's, all this, she was a goddess who was female, but she had masculine qualities. And so she's seeking to make women now into her own image. That's what but it goes further because what happens is now it goes into the sexual realm because she's the goddess of sexuality. So what happens now? She is blending the lines of male and female. So what would we expect to happen? Exactly what's happening right now.
Wow.
She had an ancient priesthood. Her ancient priesthood were men who walked around her temples dressed up as women. Acting as women, talking as women, appearing as women in drag. And so what happened is, actually, you know what stopped this? The gospel. We have a short memory. We don't realize this. So when you take God out, it is absolute. It's inevitable that this is coming back.
So two things here, because one, we just read this on the other site, which keep in mind was a secular site, and now he's affirming this too. So quite literally, when we look at drag queens, right? And I'm pretty sure everyone has asked themselves this over the last couple of years, because there's been an explosion of drag queen activity, let's say over the last 5 to 10 years, that everyone has noticed. And you wonder, it's like, why is it that, these drag queens want so much access to children? Why is it that drag queen story hour became a thing out of nowhere? It's almost like a day, and the next thing you know, drag queen story hours is all over like the world. Why is it that we're taking children to drag shows? It's like, why is it every time we turn on television, it's RuPaul's Drag Race? How come every time we turn on, a movie, there's drag queens? And it's almost like they just taking over things, and you start thinking to yourself, where did all this come from? Because we know that it's not natural, because if it was natural, no one would question it. But the fact that everyone is questioning it tells us that it's not natural, and we're all trying to figure out where this come from, where's the spirit of all this coming from. And I think we finally got our answer here. So I want to skip ahead just a little bit here, because essentially what he's going to talk about here is that kind of the Stonewall riot, which, is something that's not really the biblical sense. It's an incident that happened, I think, about 50, 60 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, where there was a riot, I guess you could say, where they were trying to stop, a drag queen event, and then I guess the drag queens kind of did the uprisal about the whole thing, and then it was one of the key instances that led to quite literally a legalization of drag queens, because a lot of people don't even remember this. And a lot of places in this nation, it was actually illegal to be a drag queen not that long ago. Like, we're talking about 50s, that being a drag queen was illegal. This was one of the few instances that led to that being changed. And now, like I said, you're seeing drag queens everywhere now. It's literally being shoved in your face. And what we talked about here is that these priests and these priestess, the people who were quite literally bringing out the worship of this demonic god, were all transgender people, men who were dressed like women, or women who were dressed like men, aka drag queens, and they were the ones promoting the worship of this false demon god. So when you see this, and I think I've given you enough evidence just from the readings from multiple sources all around the world. We've done LGBTQ sources, biblical sources, Hindu sources, India, all around the world. You see the same thing here. It's like, these drag queens that you're seeing all over the place today, are these essentially prophetesses of Ishtar? Are we seeing the demonic worship of Ishtar, Inanna, Isis, whatever you want to call her? Are we seeing this through drag queens? History would tell us probably so. The Bible tells us probably so. And now you're seeing that a lot of these historians are making the same conclusions here, that, yeah, this is not natural. There's definitely something behind this here. It is not of God. Also, someone here says that I watched some HTV show with my mom, and they have this woman looking like a man, and as a woman, it says they're trying to normalize it in former conservative shows. Yeah, I've noticed that too. I know HGTV used to be like a big hub for conservatives, because it was one of the few things you can watch on television where they couldn't like shove a political message down your throat. And it got to a point where it was like, And then it just got to a point where it's like, well, if I just watch a show about people building stuff, then I don't have to worry about them trying to like make my kids gay or stuff like that. That's how bad it is. But keep in mind, you're not safe on HGTV either. I mean, if you recall that drag kid show that came out a couple of years ago, that Generation Drag, that was Discovery Plus, and I think that was either TLC where you see a lot of that stuff in too. So yeah. The gays can't have kids, so you got to convert them. That's another big instance too. I think with the fall of Hollywood, they don't have the masses flooding into the feed and corruption they're spreading. That look, Hollywood is definitely on the decline. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But unfortunately, they still have significant influence, not only over the United States but over the world too. So their influence may be dying, but it's still pretty big. So here's where it gets very interesting here, because now you're going to start seeing the parallels directly with the god of Ishtar and the modern LGBTQ movement, and you're going to start seeing a lot of things that are going to completely blow your mind. You thought that what I've shown you so far was eye-opening. This is where it really gets eye-opening. So when you're asking yourself, why is it every time, especially during this month, I go on television and there's people marching in the streets and they all have rainbow flags and there's drag queens and homosexual men and lesbians and all of this stuff, and it's all around kids. Where did all this come from? Why did it become so popularized in our society all over the world? You're about to find out why.
God has claimed 1 month of the ancient world.
Yes.
And that month is the month of...
Well, I'll tell you, because this is not just that movement. This has affected our entire world now. I mean, this has affected everything. 1 month where she'd especially possessed the culture. And so I looked, okay, what was it called? Well, I looked back in the writings of the first Christians, because it was still happening, back then. So I looked at the writings of Saint Jerome, and he identifies it. And he says it was the month called, in Latin, he says it was the month of Iunium, or in English, the month of June. June is the month where she possessed the culture. June, she was the goddess of pride. So June has become the month of pride. She's the goddess of altered sexuality. So June
is quite literally the month that in ancient times they used to honor and worship the false demon god of Ishtar. And if you go off of a Babylonian calendar, if you go off a Hebrew calendar, and there's a third one too, I want to say it's not the Macedonian calendar, but there's a third calendar too. And when you dig into the dates that all of the most important dates of Ishtar worship occurred, it's all set in the month of June. So you're seeing this now, that it's not a coincidence that June is quote unquote Pride Month. It's nothing that is happening in this world is by a coincidence. Nothing that is happening by chance. Everything is done for a reason. Now, we might not always know exactly what the reasons are, because, like I said, the Bible calls it mystery religion. And this is why it's very important. God does not keep secrets from the world. He does not keep secrets from man. God is the only person, like I said in this many times before, has told you the origin, the beginning of this story, the middle of this story, and he's even given us how this whole thing is going to end. He's the only person, the only God in the world who has done this, because he's the only true God of the world. All of these other entities always have some kind of secret knowledge that they claim. This is kind of what we talk about here, where all these really, whether it's Freemasonry or whether it's mystery religion, a lot of these cults and demonic cults, they all say that, well, if you attain some secret knowledge, 10%, the 5% nation is a great example of this. When you attain some secret knowledge and you become just like the gods, because now you're going to be enlightened and you're going to have this information that the world doesn't have. And every single time you figure out what is this this hidden knowledge, it's always goes back to demonic worship. Every single time. And that's exactly what we go down to here. And unfortunately, we're currently in June. Hetero Pride Month, spread the word. Exactly, right? But no, it gets worse, because they go even deeper into it. Like I said, everything that you're seeing today is not by chance.
June has become the month of altered sexuality. And think about it. But Jesus said it all, because the spirits go back to the house that they possessed. So she used to possess the month of June. She's gone back to it. June has gone back to its old form. And not only that, here's another thing. She was also the goddess of parades. Wow. She caused men to parade through the city streets dressed up as women. Women parade the city dressed up as men. Parades that just were full of colors and were full of sexual licentiousness. Well, they're bad. And they even, and when they stopped, when the gospel came. You know, and now when you take God out, they're going to come back. You know, so and the people who are doing it, they don't know. They have no idea what.
Well, what do we hear on that video from, I think it was Now This? Remember when we were talking about the Indian transgenders, and they were trying to spin it, and it was like, oh, well, you know, the third gender in India was completely normal until the British came along and the colonizers came along and ruined everything, right? That's precisely like what they did. And what he's saying there is like, yeah, that's true, because when people started spreading the gospel, when people started spreading the truth about what these people were actually doing, all of a sudden the demonic worship dissipated. It slowed down, it stopped. But in the eyes of people who are wicked, they consider that a bad thing because they want the evil to continue. They don't want good to win. They don't want Christ to win. So any instance where Christ is actually winning, they consider that to be bad. Like I said, this is all based on a rebellion against God. That is all what it comes down to, and it's all demonic in origin because these entities, these powers and principalities have been rebelling against God quite literally since the beginning, even before the beginning.
What they're doing is spiritual, but she knows what she's doing. And the other thing is that she had a sign. There was a sign that was associated with her. You know what the sign was? It was the sign called the rainbow. It's the sign of the rainbow. And the interesting thing, so why is the rainbow the sign? You know, the rainbow belongs to God.
Yeah.
But on her myth, it says that she steals what belongs to other gods for herself. So she takes the rainbow, and the rainbow, you know, I won't go into it, but in the book I show each color of the rainbow flag actually it reveals the goddess, you know. And so, and think of.
By the way, like I said, he's absolutely right by what he's saying here. A lot of people who profess worship of Ishtar claim that she was the one responsible for the rainbow, because if you go really deep into this mythology behind Ishtar, keep in mind it's all false, by the way. They're all lying to you. But the reason why the name Queen of Heaven came to be is because in the ancient pagan times, they believed that this Ishtar deity was at one point the wife of God, that she was the wife of God who was with God during the creation. Then somehow God got jealous of her because he got jealous of, you know, her feminine nature and her feminine worship, cast her out of heaven. And then basically she still has like all of her same powers, just as the God of the Bible does, just that they're just completely separated, right? So they look at her to be the divine figure of God. And this is where you get the lie of that she's the Queen of Heaven. And like I said, it's a name, Queen of Heaven, that is still being propped up quite literally by the billions today. Like, we're talking about how many people still believe this lie. There's at least 1.7 billion people today in some way, shape, or form believe in this Queen of Heaven. They'll say that no, it's only Mary, it's not Ishtar. Like I said, Ishtar has many names because guess what? Satan uses the same lies over and over again because people don't learn their lesson and they end up falling for the exact same lies that have been around for thousands of years here. But I actually do have even further evidence about Ishtar and the rainbow here, but I want him to finish this up and then we'll wrap things up here.
Think about this, but how crazy this is. You know, the American embassy, they fly the American flag. They don't fly other flags.
Yeah.
But we fly the rainbow flag celebrating sexuality. That's not natural. No. You know, nations will celebrate one day of the year to celebrate their birth or their independence, but nations all over celebrate 30 days given to this sexuality, and it's linked to the 30 days of the goddess. That's not natural. You have you go to a supermarket in June and you'll find children's cereal boxes with rainbows on them. That's not natural. That is supernatural. And so it's touching, really touching our culture, touching everything. But not only that, even the Supreme Court, because let me tell you how this affected our life. Because the Supreme Court, you know, and the Supreme Court didn't know what it was doing, you know, but the goddess does, the spirits do. The thing is, there have been 3 major rulings that have transformed sexuality, and they took place.
Okay, now this part is going to be crazy. I really want you guys to pay attention to this next part because I had to go back and do a little research to confirm this. What he's saying here is 100% true. And when I say that things happen for a reason, there's no coincidence. This is absolutely insane. This is going to blow your mind. Pay attention to what he's about to say here.
In a 12-year period. The first one legitimized same-sex sexuality. The second one struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. And the third one changed marriage forever. It altered marriage to become same-sex marriage. So when were they? 2000. It was 2003, 2013, and 2015. 12 years. The first one took place in June. The last days of June, which are the time of the goddess, not the time of the summer solstice, that's the time of the goddess, especially, happened on June 26th. The second one was 10 years later, happened in June, last days of June, same day, June 26th, summer solstice time. The third one, remember when marriage, we all remember it, when marriage was struck down. June, last days of June, time of the summer solstice, days of the goddess, June 26th, the same day. June 26th is linked to the mystery of the goddess. And I will tell you one thing. Do you remember, Vlad, remember on that day when...
So he'll explain to you the last part here, but I just wanted to cap off what he just said there. What he said there is that over a 12-year period, and this is all the stuff that's happened in the last 21 years in our country, but in a 12-year period from 2003 and 2015, in between that time frame, there was three Supreme Court rulings that all happened on the exact same day. So you have in June 26th in 2003, the Supreme Court legalized homosexuality as a rule, right? That happened on June 26, 2003 by the Supreme Court. So you fast forward about 10 years, and on June 26, 10 years later, the Supreme Court struck down the Defense of Marriage rule that was being passed at the time as an opposition to gay marriage. And then 2 years later, on June 26th, on 2015, the Supreme Court officially legalized gay marriage, redefining God's rules. All three of those rulings by the Supreme Court happened on the exact same day in different years, all June 26th. And they just said it right there, June 26th is a day directly linked with the pagan worship of Ishtar. Isn't that insane how all this happened? So I want you guys to understand this. Everything that you see from the world that's being presented to you as normal, as coincidence, is absolutely not normal. It's absolutely not coincidence. These are happening. These rulings happen because we're being controlled by a demonic spirit who wants us to rebel quite literally against the God of creation. Is there a demonic principality behind the gay agenda by that? Oh, you talking about the name of the video. Okay, I understand that. No problem. I said that they used the rainbow to mock, from Genesis to mock God. Now, this gets even more interesting here. But yeah, go back and research that point on your own time. Blew my mind when I realized that, and that's when I realized that, oh no, there's something really going on here. Like, this is no longer like coincidence. Like, this is straight up evil that we're seeing here today. So for everyone who's supportive of this LGBTQ movement and supportive of the people in this movement, understand that these people, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and I hate to break this to you, in a lot of cases it's more knowingly than unknowingly, they're all doing what they're doing now as not only a direct rebellion against God, but to essentially promote the worship of a false demon god. Now, we're going to end it with this, because this is very interesting here too. Actually, I should bring this up here just for a second, because I did want to point out here that, yes, when we talk about the rainbow here, and this is a very interesting point here too, and when we talk about the rainbow, the reason why you're asking yourself, okay, why is it that, the LGBTQ community uses the rainbow as their symbol of, I guess, sexual identity, sexual disclosure, whatever the case may be? Why is it that they're using the rainbow? Because the rainbow, even though it's attributed by God, because the reason why the rainbow exists is that it was God's promise after the flood that he wouldn't flood the earth again by water. It was God's promise and covenant to us, which is represented in the rainbow. But then Satan, because it's what Satan does, perverts it, took that rainbow, gave it to a demon god, and now people utilize the demon god's rainbow over the rainbow of God. Now, a lot of you guys might not know this, and a lot of you guys probably not have caught this, but there is a very, very subtle difference between Ishtar's rainbow, which is essentially the pride flag that we all know and see today, and the actual rainbow of God. There's a very, very distinct difference between the two. Do you guys happen to know what that is? Like I said, if you're not familiar with it, you'll completely go past it. But there's a very significant change and alteration that Satan did with his rainbow. In God's rainbow, as you guys know, there's 7 colors. There's 7 colors in God's rainbow. So you go with blue, orange, yellow, green, red, indigo, and purple. Those are the 7 colors of God's rainbow. But you notice one is real. Not quite. But if you notice that in the LGBTQ pride flag in their rainbow, there's only 6 colors in their rainbow. They removed the color from the rainbow. You guys know what color that was? The color is indigo. If you look at an LGBTQ pride flag, you can Google it right now yourself. The ones that people are flying at these pride parades and whatnot, there's only 6 colors on it. They're missing a color, and they took it out intentionally. Why would the LGBTQ movement remove the color of indigo out of their flag, out of the rainbow? Now, there's been a couple of explanations given to this, which I don't buy at all. One explanation is that, well, apparently the color is hard to produce, so they condensed purple and blue, so that way they didn't have to worry about trying to create an indigo color. And then other people said that, it's just a lot easier to redefine 2 into 1 rather than have indigo. So what they're trying to make it seem like is that, it's no big deal. We just took it out because it's kind of an inconvenience. People know what the colors is, and we just remove indigo out of the platform altogether. No, they did that for a reason. And here's the crazy part of what that reason is. Ask yourself, what does the color of indigo in God's rainbow actually represent? And this is where it gets crazy here. So last video that I'm going to play for you guys here tonight is that this is, I think this is the video. I'm going to make sure. This is Little Light Studios. I'll link to you guys the full video on your own time here. And you have an ex-gay man here who repented away from homosexuality. And he's talking about what the colors of the rainbow actually solidifies here. And he happened to find out or happened to realize that, hey, wait a second, this rainbow that I had been identifying with this entire time, it's missing a color. It's missing the color of indigo. Why is indigo not in the LGBTQ pride flag rainbow, but it's supposed to be a representation of the kind of that perversion of God's rainbow? What is the difference there? Why did they remove it? Here's his explanation here, and it goes into a lot of, puts it to you this way, it exposes exactly who's at play here when you realize why they removed it.
Very good. So we want to discuss what it takes to make this color here. Now, go ahead and fill this if you would, Mikey. We want to make the indigo color, which is missing, and indigo is a combination of purple and blue. So what does it take?
Oh, that's a pretty color.
It is pretty. Unfortunately, it's kind of dark here, whatever. But there's a distinct difference between these 3 colors. Yeah. But indigo is a combination of blue, which represents the law, which is God the Father, and also purple, which is royalty. So isn't it interesting that it's a combination of a primary
and a secondary
color? So this, if you'll push these 2 together when I lift this, we push those 2 together. So indigo is actually what we call a tertiary or 3rd level color. So wait a minute, I want you to understand that the indigo color is completely different than all the other colors because these are primary and secondary colors. This is a tertiary or 3rd level color. Do you think that it has a special meaning?
Probably.
Do you think that God would just throw it in there? It's like, I need a filler, here, we'll throw that in there. I believe that there's a specific meaning and purpose behind this color. And I was praying about it, and I looked in the Bible, and I go, surely indigo's got to be in there, but it's not. I'm a hairdresser. I'm not a Bible scholar. And so I prayed at night before I went to sleep, and I said, Lord, I know it means something, and I'm not figuring it out, so you're going to have to help me. Amen. And I went to sleep. And so one morning, not long after that, I woke up, and the first thing on my mind before I even opened my eyes is the Lord said, well, Mike, if indigo isn't in the Bible or Spirit of Prophecy, is there anywhere in the Bible where blue and purple are mentioned together?
Right? Good one.
What?
Sanctuary?
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I didn't know this. I had to look it up. In Exodus 26, 27, and 28, we find that blue and purple are mentioned together in the sanctuary. 5 places in the sanctuary: the high priest's robe, the veil between the holy and most holy place, the veil at the opening of the sanctuary, the covering over the sanctuary, also the gate around the outside of the sanctuary had blue and purple in it together. So what happened in the sanctuary?
It was all about our salvation. That was pointing toward Jesus.
Pointing toward Jesus. Why? Wow. What does the sanctuary represent?
It was representing his sacrifice for us.
His sacrifice, everything that Jesus did in the sanctuary. So indigo represents everything that Jesus is doing. Where's that sanctuary now?
In heaven.
In heaven.
In most holy
heaven. So Jesus is in the sanctuary in heaven, working out our salvation. That's the difference between the indigo color and all of the other colors together. Even though these are important, the indigo color represents what Jesus is doing now in my behalf to make me fit for heaven.
Amazing.
Isn't that interesting? So the color of indigo was removed from the LGBTQ flag because of its significance in the Bible to Jesus Christ. And go even a step further, because when you look at what the color indigo represents, it obviously represents the infinite wisdom of God, God's love and mercy, what they were talking about here, the future salvation that Christ will give us by believing in the gospel and his death, burial, and resurrection. But let's go even further than that. What does indigo represent otherwise? It symbolizes the barrier between creation, which is where time, heaven, and the Lord lives in eternity. Now, who fell from time, heaven, and where the Lord currently lives in eternity? The fallen angels and Satan live. You go even further than that. We talk about the color of purple when you're mixing blue with purple. What does purple represent? Purple represents royalty, I should say, majesty, the kingdom, and authority. Well, when you get further into the Bible, especially towards the end, we'll talk about Revelation, who is referred to as the King of Kings? Jesus Christ. So the color has very important significance to God, not only to God himself, but to Jesus Christ. And then you realize what we're doing with this LGBTQ movement, which is a perversion against God. What did they do? They took the rainbow that they stole from God, yet removed the color that is a direct reference to Jesus Christ and made it their own rainbow. That's why the LGBTQ rainbow has 6 colors and not 7. Very, very interesting. And what I'm going to just show you guys here, just at the course of this night, is that the theme of what we're seeing here is that everything about this entire LGBTQ movement, where people want to acknowledge it or not, has demonic, rebellious origins to it from the very, very beginning. This is not something that just happened in the last 30 years, even though there's a lot of significant events that happened in the last 30 years to explain this. This is something that's been going on for a very, very long time and continues and will continue till the end. It says, yeah, bam, exactly. I mean, there's a reason why this happened. And like, this is why I said, when you try to dig deep into this topic here, you can only truly understand what's going on if you use God as a lens to why this is happening. Because if you remove God out of the lens and you just say that, well, I don't believe in God, so I don't believe in any of this stuff, then you're going to miss everything. Everything's going to go completely over your head. You're not going to understand anything that's happening here. It's not going to make any sense to you, because why is it that the entire world is rebelling against an entity that you claim doesn't exist? Right? That's what we talk about. Our non-believers or our atheists, agnostics. It's like they don't believe that we live in a world where God actually exists. Why would the world, and I'm not talking about just our country, the world for thousands of years, go this deep into rebelling against the entity that doesn't exist, unless, of course, that entity does in fact exist? Now, here's a little bit of a white pill for you. It's a white pill and a warning. Let's just put it this way. Jumping over to Revelation 18 here, and this is how we're going to end this one. If you guys read Revelation 17, 18, we've talked about this. There are multiple episodes now. You guys know who I believe the harlot of Babylon to be. I've said it enough times. You guys probably know by now. However, this is going back to Revelation 18 when it talks about the destruction and the defeat of the harlot of Babylon. I implore you to go back and read Revelation 17 and read Revelation 18, because when you start reading these books, you start realizing here that, wow, it's talking about, this woman, this harlot of Babylon, mystery Babylon, this female entity here that is responsible for making the entire world drink of the wine of the God, of the wrath of God, and making everyone basically submitting everyone to sexual immorality and idolatry and like all these other things that are happening in the world. And you realize that, wait a minute, like, I think Revelation 18 might be talking about quite literally this demonic entity of Ishtar, Ashtaroth, whatever you want to call her, because there's a lot of parallels here to what we just talked about throughout the course of this night and what Revelation 18 is talking about as the entity that is going to be destroyed in the tribulation. So here's Revelation 18, and keep in mind, this is a warning and it's a white pill. So pay attention here. 18 says here, after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried out mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place for demons. Very important there. A prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all nations have drunk in the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich throughout the abundance of her luxury. And what does it say here in verse 4? I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you shall share in her sins, that you will receive her plagues. For her sins have reached to the heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. What is being betrayed here? When the harlot of Babylon finally falls, when she is betrayed by the Antichrist in the tribulation, in the final days, when this entity is completely wiped out and destroyed, you will never see it rise again on earth ever again. When it is destroyed in the tribulation, it will be destroyed for good. So what God is telling you here is that what you've been seeing throughout this entire night, there's a time limit on all of this stuff. This outward rebellion against God through the LGBTQ movement, and what you're seeing about false religions. Obviously, we talked about how all of these people are doing worship to false entities, to false gods. All of this is going to stop once Babylon is destroyed here. And all entities that are represented within Babylon will also cease. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about the transgenders who are worshiping Ishtar, the Roman Catholic Church worshiping their Mary. Everything that is in this umbrella of Mystery Babylon will be wiped out for good and will never rise again. However, there is a warning out there to the people who continue to be a part of this mystery religion, that continue to be a part of this and knows that what they're doing is wrong and what they're doing is leading to them suffering the wrath of God if they do not come to Jesus Christ, if they do not repent of what they have been doing, if they do not repent of their unbelief. This is what's going to occur to them in the final day. So what you're seeing there is, for Christians, this is going to be a blessed day, because when the harlot of Babylon is finally defeated, it says the heavens rejoice and will celebrate at her destruction. However, for those that are still on the world, who are partaking in her fornication, who are partaking in, quite literally, her worship over the entire world, the people who are still with her, who do not turn away from her and come back to God, to come back to Christ, those people will in fact suffer the wrath of God when it's all said and done. That's the warning, but there's a white pill that comes along with it. And once again, I'm going to give you guys the gospel that saves, quite literally the only thing that saves you from what is to come here. 1 Corinthians 15, this is verses 1 through 4 here. Moreover, thou, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I have preached to you, which is also what you received and which you stand by which you are also saved, if you hold fast in that word that I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For to deliver to you the first that which you have received, Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. He was buried, and he rose again on the third day according to the scriptures. What is this saying here? Ishtar is not going to save you. Whatever Hindu god you worship and believe in is not going to save you. Praying to Mary is not going to save you. I don't know, Carol, how many names she has on here. Queen of Heaven, Ishtar, Isis, Anana, all these names for this demon god. These entities are only designed to send you directly to hell. There's only salvation in one God, one true God, and that one true God is Jesus Christ. And he wants you to believe in him, his death, burial, and resurrection, the penalty that he paid for your sins, that those that believe on him will be saved in the last days, that you will have a place built for you in heaven if you become a child of Christ, if you turn your life to Christ and believe on the gospel. That is the only path to salvation. Every other path is a path directly to hell. And I'm going to leave it there. That's how we're going to wrap up this particular episode. I'm going to get some last minute comments here real quick. saying that that's interesting about indigo. Like I said, there's a lot of information that we went through here tonight, so I definitely implore you guys. If you guys listen to this episode and you're like, "Wow, I never considered that before. I never thought of that as a possibility." Do your own research. Go back and do your own research after this stream is over. Look into these things and really look into the origins of where this LGBTQ movement came from. And I tell you what, I guess one quick little side note here is that we're watching a nation quite literally pledge its allegiance to a demon god. Whether you want to admit that or not, that's quite literally what we're doing now. And you have to ask yourself, if these people are legitimately pledging their allegiance to Ishtar, and even our own nation's capital is saying that this is their god now, you have to ask yourself, are we currently in the United States of America, are we currently under the judgment of God? Think about that. There's so many people who ask the question that, no, where is the United States when Revelation is going on? Why are we not mentioned? Well, maybe we're not going to be a part of it. Maybe we're not going to be the good guys of this story like everyone wants you to believe. Because if you believe in pre-tribulation rapture, which is a rapture before all this happens, if all of the real Christians are raptured out of here before the tribulation begins, who do you think is going to be here on the earth during that tribulation period? It's going to be people who are going to be worshiping this God rather than the God of the Bible. So keep that in mind here too. The world has seen zero problem with embracing Satan. Like I said, when you really start reading the Bible and you understand that God is real and Christ is real, and read what they taught, and you start looking at the world that we're in right now, you realize that we're in a world that is in complete rebellion of God, because this is a world that is ruled and controlled by Satan, and he hates God, and he hates God's creation, he hates Christ, and he's created a world that's quite literally to separate us as far from Christ as we possibly can, so that you can fall into the same eternal damnation that is reserved for him and his angels. And like I said, when you have to see the world through God's lens, because if you don't, nothing else is going to make sense about what is happening here. They are hypocrites. Vanya clapping. I hope I did a good job explaining all this here tonight as well. Great podcast. So, and you know, we didn't lose any stream here today, so that helps us out as well too. So, here's what we're going to do. Next week's episode, it's going to be episode 48 of the Bible Lens podcast. And I'm going to start going into kind of the culture now, because last week I did the history of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now I've shown you guys the history of modern LGBTQ worship. So let's ask this question now, going into next week. If we are to believe or understand that everything about the LGBTQ movement is in fact of demonic origin, then we can use that information to ask this next question for next week's show. Why is the LGBTQ so drawn to satanic rebellion? Why are they so drawn to satanic rebellion? Why is it that you see so many allies of the LGBTQ community are supporting Satanism and using occult symbols and getting into witchcraft and occultism? Why are you seeing so many drag queens using emphasis of Satan and Luciferianism? Why is the LGBTQ so drawn to satanic worship? It's because they're essentially already under the wing of a demonic god that's leading them to their only logical conclusion, which is Satan. We will talk about that next week here on this show. Outside of that, I want to thank you guys for joining me here on this episode. Since I did not know the demonic LGBT was missing indigo. Like I said, do your own research on the pride flag, on indigo. What indigo? It's a crazy rabbit hole that I just can't possibly cover on one episode. Maybe we'll do future episodes about it, but so much here that we've gone into. I hope you guys look into this and look into the world at a much different light that you guys came into this. This coming Tuesday, we're going to be doing episode 103 of the Barroom podcast. I know we're going to be reviewing the Bad Boys movie this Tuesday. I don't know what else we got coming up, but we'll find some topics to talk about. Wednesday, we're going to be doing the 01 podcast. There won't be a Friday night movie club this week or for the next few weeks. So, and then, like I said, next week, episode 48, I should say, of the Bible Lens, we're going to talk about why so many people in the LGBTQ are drawn to satanic rebellion. Until then, I want to thank all you guys for joining me here on all three platforms. So, a quick little shout out to everyone who joined us here tonight. Leslie Tarkin, Vanya, excuse me, Alex versus Evil, Diesel joining us here, awesome one who joined us as well. Duke Nukem, shout out to you. everyone who joined us on this show here tonight. I think I got everyone. To everyone who joined us on the show, I hope that you guys learned some very interesting things here for this one. I hope to see you guys next week here on this program. So till then, I see you next week. Adios, goodbye, and see you later.
Once I turned to Jesus and I realized how he had changed my outlook on life, not just softball, but understanding how much I have to live for, and that's living to exemplify the kingdom. And I think that brings so much freedom.
David, I know share a strong faith. How does that help you on a night like tonight?
It's everything. Christ's resurrection is everything. Not just his life, but his death and resurrection. You can only get that through him, the Holy Spirit only through him. No false prophets, no Muhammad, no anyone else. Only Jesus Christ himself.
Let me tell you one more thing. This might be the most important thing you'll ever hear. There is true freedom, a freedom that no one can take from you in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Don't ever forget that. If you remember one thing I say, remember that.
And I've got lots to tell you. Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved.
Is that your reaction to what people who want you off this property shortly?
Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved.
And what about you being stripped of your belt? I mean, that's you must be very unhappy with that. What's your reaction to that?
Jesus loves me. He loves you too, and he loves you too. He loves these people in here, and he loves everybody in the world. All you've got to do is repent of your sins, and you will be forgiven.